Lunar Lux is actually a game I was looking forward to ever since I got the press blast about it. Not because it was reinventing the wheel in anything it was setting out to do, but because it looked like it was going to try to bring together a lot of interesting ideas from jRPGs over the years into one easily consumable package. And it did achieve this for the most part, though, as with most indie titles, there are going to be a few blemishes to hit on that could make or break the title for you. Now, for the sake of clarity, this is my experience after binging the game quite quickly, since I did not get the press key until around the 11th hour. So while I will try to avoid the nitpicks that come from that, it does weigh into how I'm still viewing certain parts of the combat, since I really didn't have time to mellow out on them. Now, as far as the other aspects of the game, as you'll be able to tell from the background footage, it has really solid pixel art, fun dynamic transitions, even if the warning sign for battle does last a bit long. It has solid music that you can listen to at will if you want, and a lot of quality of life improvements, at least in terms of actual world layout and design. So for those looking for a quick and dirty opinion on it, I enjoyed my time with the title, even in spite of a handful of little speed bumps and quirks that kinda got to me. The only conditional I would put on it would be that to really enjoy this game, you need to be able to handle action gameplay as well, since, as mentioned earlier, it adopts some of the innovations from past RPGs regarding combat, namely attack dodging methods similar to Undertale and Mega Man Battle Network, with a shield timing system on top of it, so don't expect to just pick up from a menu and wait. Now, in terms of the deep dive, the story itself was a bit hit or miss for me. Not so much because of the quality, which is fine, but rather because it leans heavily into a style more similar to shows targeting just the younger teenage audience, which, as I said, is fine, but does require accepting some more contrived aspects of the characters that keep them somewhat superficial and easily digestible. This especially starts to show up as we get further into the story and get into the motivations and relationships between characters, so don't expect any deep revelations or massive character building exercises. Instead, go into the game expecting a fun romp with a Saturday morning cartoon mixed with fun combat. The amount of references to pop media in a similar vein absolutely reinforce the fact that this is an intentional choice for the game. As far as the actual story arc itself, that is structured well enough amidst the quirky and colorful energy, even doing a decent amount of fourth wall breaks. From the start, we learn that the original planet of the humans, called Terra, was destroyed by antimatter, and they escaped to the moon to survive thanks to amazing scientists. Our protagonist is the daughter of two of these scientists, one with a coffee addiction, the other is dead for the tragic tie-in, but will have a lasting impact on the remainder of the story. There are, interestingly enough, references to Earth, a certain special gold disc, and signals they try to send out across the cosmos, but it can get lost amidst all the other tongue-in-cheek references to popular culture, be it major indie video games, animes like Dragon Ball, and a plethora of others. While it doesn't go so far as infringing on trademarks, let's just say there were enough references that a few even fell outside the bailiwick of someone nerdy enough to use the word bailiwick. That aside, the game also does a good job of introducing the main antagonist gradually over the course of the title, with the ultimate reveals being somewhat predictable if you pay attention, but still done in a nice way to keep it from being out of left field like some games tend to do in the genre. Everyone has a motivation, even if it is sometimes superficial out of necessity, to keep the game on a steady pace to completion in about 10 hours. The little bit of rivalry, romance, and other such interpersonal relationships are kept in that quirky Saturday morning cartoon energy as well, with the rival being a friend who just constantly wants to spar with you, the romance aspect being more of a tee-hee they're cute energy rather than a slobbering mess. The motivating the masses is done through sheer protagonist energy rather than through complex political and personal growth. Though, as I stated in the beginning, I was mostly interested in this game from the combat, so the story just being mediocre was not a huge disappointment for me, and since it's a style rather than a quality issue, opinions on it will truly be subjective. But speaking of the combat, it's engaging, though I personally did find that either I have bad luck or the developers preferred one mechanic more than the others, that frankly started giving me Battletoads flashbacks by the end. This is because combat for this title is more of a minigame affair than necessarily a turn-based one, even with your own skills in some cases. On your skill end, it was usually just centered around increasing your damage output, such as playing rock, paper, scissors, or timing a button press, or even button mashing. Sure, you'd do a base amount of damage without it, but if you did want to succeed on them and do maximum damage, they were good for that. These were all good, and you could pick and choose which ones you engaged with since the skills are fairly well balanced. Well, other than Stun Grenade, which when upgraded made some boss battles even easier than random enemies thanks to having a 50-50 chance of shutting them down for a turn. In longer battles, you'd even fill up a gauge to get access to super special attacks, or later on even special shape changes for a party member, that serve as essentially your limit break type spells for greatly increased damage or effect, though not too many of these had special button prompts, so they are a bit more fire and forget. On the flip side though, you have the incoming attacks, which mostly landed into 4 categories. The straight up shield group, where you were mainly just timing to raise your shield to block the enemy's attacks and had no opportunities to dodge, with some later enemies having multiple hits or weirdly timed hits to throw you off, but still reasonable. And it is worth noting, as long as you have shield points, you can still sort of use this functionality on the other 3 categories. Just realize that the shield has a little bit of a warm-up time, so you need to press it before the attack hits, but not too early, or you'll get hit as it comes down. Second in the list is the single lane dodge skills, where you move up and down to dodge attacks on a single line, with some visual or audio cues to tell you when and how to move, though some enemies were able to get kind of tough with this due to having a lot of fast attacks in quick succession, meaning you need to stay on point. While you could block these, there are a lot of multi-attacks that use this format, so you would be burning through a lot of your shields, which you do only keep a very limited number of. Third was the multi-lane dodging skills, basically the previous one but now in 2 dimensions instead of 1, up and down as well as left and right. For the most part, these were pretty cool and fun, though I did find some of the later enemies to have weird hitboxes on their attacks for this, resulting in situations where I'm not sure if I was bad or if the windows were just too narrow, but I would dodge out of the way of one attack into the fading remnants of another and get hit, or get hit by an attack before it formed. I had enough life to absorb this usually, but it did keep me from getting S tier in some battles. Finally, number 4, the one thing that was giving me Battletoads flashbacks is what I can only call the dodge shit mode, which for those that have played Undertale will be extremely familiar. But since they were done on the horizontal plane instead of vertical, I swear I felt like I was in Volkmayer's Inferno again at various times. Just like in the other modes, you can use the shield here, but you have some rather large windows as the shield is coming up as well as going down where you can easily get hit. And if you wanted to shield through most of it, you'd end up burning through most of even your late game shield stock. This was easily the most common of the types of attacks I encountered, or at the very least the ones that stood out the most, because they were by far the most aggressive. Especially a certain plant mob that would summon rings randomly inside of it that your sprite just is not fast enough to get out of the way of if it spawned you in the middle of them. The plants in question were also responsible for the one and only death I had in the game. And while the final boss has one as well, which was a real pain to dodge too since it came from all directions, I was able to control him enough and keep healed during it that I didn't really need to be too stressed out about it. That said, this could all just also be personal preference, because I loved the shield and grid-based dodges far more, since they required more timing precision on my part than necessarily pixel-perfect movement with a joystick or a keyboard. And no, you sadly cannot use the mouse to control your heart sprite, and most of the sneaky little dead zones from the demo have been not exactly fixed, but it will spawn things specifically to try and hit you out of those spots if you hide in them. This dodge stuff mechanic also makes its way into the world traversal at a couple points as well, so you definitely want to practice with it. Though thankfully the ones outside of combat just reduce your rewards if you fail them, rather than giving you a game over. So if you are really bad at them, you won't be hard blocked from progress. And in combat, you can just burn your healing items to heal through most of the life loss, though that does get expensive over time, especially as later enemies start hitting harder. As far as progression, I thought about grinding a couple times, but due to the length of battles, only killed maybe a half dozen more enemies than were necessary to move forward, and was still able to beat the game with only 1 death to my record, even getting multiple levels up after several battles because I can only assume I was possibly under-leveled for them, though I did find my progression thrown off a bit since you don't get your second party member until a good chunk of the way through the game, to the point where I was using items like I'd be solo to the end. There are also side quests you can do, items you can find by digging around in trash cans or looking for passwords, various hidden achievements and titles in game you can unearth by playing a certain way. None of them are necessary, but they're nice to have around, and about half of them can easily be completed just by playing through the game normally and exploring just a little bit. Though don't worry if you have not done them by the end of the game, since after beating the final boss, you can save and then load the game, and be able to continue your journey in a bit of a post-game situation. Though I do wish we got more information about the resolution of a certain big event in the plot that felt somewhat brushed away at the end with a "we'll figure it out" type response, and then nothing else, because we beat the big bad. It also feels, at least with the cost of certain items, that you aren't actually meant to intentionally pursue some of this in the post-game areas, when you have access to more resources from the bigger, more dangerous battles that you don't get access to until the end of the game. So part of me wonders as I move to getting that 100% completion over the next few days, if there might be something hidden in the post-game, which if I find anything, I'll toss it in the comments. Beyond that, towns are laid out interestingly with a lot of hidden stuff, and almost everything you click on has a response. You have plenty of semi-simple puzzles to solve to get more items or interesting discoveries. There's a BBS that gives you information in a sort of Reddit format about the world. So there is plenty more besides just slaying monsters and focusing on the main story if you want to dig more into the world. But do understand, it keeps consistent in the tone here as well. For example, with one of your jetpack options literally being a space cat that you ride around on. Now, the music and art design also has a lot of attention to detail, with plenty of different emotional reactions for the character avatars when speaking, clean retro-styled music to keep up that almost Super Nintendo feel, though it does feel like both of these are making a nice resurgence as of late, with releases in titles like Chained Echoes, Sea of Stars, and now Lunar Lux. So, do you like RPGs with a more lighthearted tone, or do you prefer more serious experiences with proper complex character arcs? Mention it down below, and as part of an experiment I'm running, I'll be tossing up reviews and gameplay by other creators in the end screen you see right now. So if you have a favorite, link them down below and they might get swapped in too.